Well, you guys will get all kinds of time to ask me questions because there's no competition to ask them. I think this overhead is on the speaker. Sorry if there's an echo. So the briefings, the rankings, the peer grading the briefings came back to you. I didn't see these emails. Are the emails more or less easy to handle? They're okay? All right. And did you get helpful feedback? Was it worthless feedback? On average, did it help? It was okay? Did you guys read your feedback? Did you guys read them? How was it? Was it okay? Was it easy to rank them A, B, C, or was there some student says, I want to give everybody a C. You're not allowed to do that, of course. All right, well, Hossein is coming back, and he'll be able to get the grades assembled because he's got all this stuff over on his computer. And the next time we do the briefings, it'll go smoother, not only because you have experience in doing this, but also because we have a better flow of technology. And apologies for that, but it's a little bit inevitable when you have 80 plus entries, not 80 plus students. All these ghosts are out there. Maybe they're submitting this stuff from their beach houses in Miami or something like that. Anyway, any questions about the briefings? After this, if you have any questions or whatever, I'll take those. Then I'm going to talk about the readings, and then I'll talk about or take questions from you on the midterm. Not on the midterm itself, but on the material from the class to date. So, any questions or anything like that on the briefings? There was some controversy. One student was upset that a peer grader had given a poor grade because that student did not discuss a particular pipeline, which actually was not supposed to happen, right? So I said, well, the whole point of having 3 people grading your paper is that if one of them is clueless, hopefully 2 are not clueless. And that clueless person will inflict pain on other people as well. It's hard to deal with people who are not paying attention to the rules. We're going to start knocking more and more points off of people who don't follow the rules because it's just harmful for people who are not paying attention. So 2 students, for some reason, did someone else's peer review, and because of a mistake they made, they had to redo all of their peer grading. That was the way we penalized them for points. But following the instructions should be helpful. If you have a question about the instructions, ask me. Don't assume. And I'll send an email to everybody if it's a legitimate question, basically. Yeah?
What if I didn't receive a grade for one of my feedback?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get a grade or anything like that.
Then that person may have left a grade somewhere that we were supposed to find it.
I couldn't find it.
No, not you. Yeah. So the thing is that your grade is going to be the total of, or the average of the 3 grades, right? So say that you got, Right, you've got 2 grades that you know, and there's a 3rd grade that you don't know, and assuming that grade does exist, which is our problem, because sometimes students left the grade in a comment box instead of on the text, your grade will show up. When we get the grades aggregated over this weekend, we'll put it on Canvas so you see the total grade. It's going to be the average of the 3 grades you get. So AAA gets you an A, ABC gets you a B, CCC gets you a C, and so on. Okay? ABC would be, AAB is a A minus, I guess, something like that. But we'll figure it out. Okay. Any other questions about the briefings and so on? All right. The Hardin paper. What was the Hardin paper about? I'll ask you. No, Hardin is the one that's called The Tragedy of the Commons. Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, so he's talking about population, and there's a sentence in there about doing the greatest good for the greatest number. What does he point out about that sentence? I'll ask you. What does he point out about doing the greatest good for the greatest number? Did you read it? No. Okay. Right next to you. Did you do the reading? What does he say about doing the greatest good for the greatest number? Zero population growth. No, that's one of his conclusions that comes later on. What does he say about doing the greatest good for the greatest number? It's an old quote. It's an old philosophical quote. Don't know. Did you read it? Too many things at once. Okay, that's all right. Lots of fish. What he said is that we should do the greatest good, which in some ways is a question of lifestyle, right? Having the greatest good possible, but also have the greatest number, which is having the greatest population possible. And he said, you cannot do this. You cannot maximize two objectives, right? This is known as, in California, there's this huge ongoing 20-year fight about fish versus farming, basically, for the use of water. And people say, we want to have co-equal goals, right? So we're going to have a co-equal goal. We're going to maximize the fish population, and we're going to maximize agricultural production using the same water. And that water literally cannot be used twice, right? So it's an oxymoron. It is logically impossible. It sounds politically very pleasing, right? But it's logically impossible. How do you do the greatest good for the greatest number if another person shows up and says, I want some of your good, please? And we're not talking necessarily, I want your cell phone, right? This class is not about those private goods. Those are very simple to manage. It's how do we share the commons? And he gives many examples in the article. I thought actually the article was a lot better than I remember because I read it quickly. But he does a very good job discussing, he does talk about the commons, and he uses this kind of hypothetical commons of the sheep and so on. And he does not actually get to the Ostrom type of solution. He talks about a government control over the commons or a privatization, right? A community control is a little bit left out of that discussion. It's not a big critique of that paper, but it does show how that paper is complemented by the Dietz and Ostrom and the other author, I can't remember, paper, right? So he's talking about the tragedy of the commons, and surprisingly, the whole article really is about population growth. And population growth is a big topic we'll talk about later after the midterm because it's such an interesting question in terms of politics and economics and resources. China has a very famous one-child policy for population, which has different exemptions and qualifications and so on. If you're a minority, you can have more than one children. A particular declared minority can have more than one children. Now I think they have a thing which is that if the mother and the father, what does it say? If it's two children from two single children are allowed to have more than one children, is that right? So if you're the only child and your wife or husband is an only child, then you can have more than one child. Just two, all right. The thing that's interesting though about China is that right across the sea to what some people call Eastern China or other people call Taiwan, there's another population of very similar people that had a very similar starting point, and their birth rate per capita or their population growth rate is lower than in China. And in some ways, what we see happen in China right now is also a lowering of the population growth rate, not because of this program, which has been in place for many, many years, but because it's so bloody expensive to have a kid in China if you live in the city, right? I mean, you guys are the expensive kids, right? Like, how many of your brothers and sisters are, studying in Canada? And that factor has hit on a lot of cultures. It turns out that when kids are cheap, as in, oh, I had a child and that one died, so I had a few more, right? It used to be literally you would have a dozen kids, women, actually, men were lucky at this point, right? Women would have a dozen kids, 3 of them would live, and then that would be the target. And as soon as health got better, so that the children didn't die so often, there was what was called a demographic transition, where the death rate drops first, and then the birth rate drops behind it, because families typically do want to have a few children. They don't usually want to have a dozen children, right? Even Catholics are like, oh my God. Literally, they need help from God, right? Because I have a dozen children. Monty Python has a terrible scene on this with the meaning of life. So there are forces that affect childbearing, right? There's public health, there's personal choice, there's the cost, there's the government or regulations, right? But the government is like really so far down the line in terms of these factors that it's not as effective as other ways of how do you call it? Helping people choose in a way, right? That's why that's why, for example, Bangladesh, which is an extremely poor country of over 150 million people, I think, extremely densely populated. I mean, it's 150 million people in, like Greater Vancouver. It's a very, very, actually, I think the statistic is the entire country of Bangladesh is roughly, I think it's 15 times or 10 to 15 times the size of Victoria Island. The whole country. But there's 150 million people living on that area, and Victoria Island has whatever, 12 people or something, right? So there's a very high population density in that country. Interestingly enough, and very poor country, their statistics on maternal death, women who die giving birth to children, their statistics on child death, and their statistics on several other important factors for quality of life are better than the country next door, India, which is, and Pakistan for sure, which are richer countries, but because the government and international organizations have done a lot of targeting of aid and support for women and families and public health in that country, to the point where their statistics are way better, their public health statistics are way better than their economic statistics. From a development perspective, this is actually significant because congratulations, you're rich, except that your kids keep dying, is not exactly a good headline, right? You're rich, but there's pollution everywhere is not exactly a nice way to live, right? Because your quality of life is terrible. So Hardin doesn't discuss really the way that prices or prosperity change the decision to have children. He talks as a biologist, as a scientist, I'm not sure what science he is, scientists might, of people who are just bots, who are just kind of doing things. And doing things includes having sex and having children, and we need to put a hold on that and have fewer children. And he goes back to a moral question, which is better than saying we're going to sterilize people. But he doesn't necessarily get into the behavioral dimension, which is really important. And he misses that. He gets it in terms of private property for protecting the commons. And then he talks about government intervention to protect the commons, but he doesn't talk so much about the communal way of regulating the commons. He talks about morality as a way of regulating population, but doesn't talk about the self-interested means of regulating population. So we'll come back to that paper later, but it's still a touchstone in terms of the conflict between having more people and having people who are happier people, right? And we want to have a gradual shift from a lot of poor people to fewer richer people. We could have a lot of richer people, but at some point there's going to be an environmental damage, which is what we've seen over and over again, and what we're seeing now with the impacts of energy consumption and climate change. So that's roughly what that paper is all about. The Gordon-Scott paper is longer. It's more economic, more academic. And it's I keep forgetting that the guy was from Carleton College, a Canadian, which is a good thing for the home team. And I just watched the 2010 American-Canadian hockey final, or whatever that was, at the Olympics, so go Canada. Anyway, so Scott talks about fisheries. And what's the thing that he starts with in terms of fisheries? What does he get into? He has a long discussion, actually. Do you remember what he talked about in the fisheries? Do you know the paper we're talking about? Did you read it? A little bit? Do you remember what it's about, the topic? It's a resource. What topic is it about? Good, fisheries. Okay. What does he say about fisheries? Not exactly. Fisheries is, yeah, he talks about the resource. What does he talk about at the start? He spends several pages on it. You don't remember? You can read it more carefully next time. Do you remember? Did you read it? A little bit. Maybe you guys can get together and, share notes. It's all right. It'll be on the midterm. What does he talk about at the start? Volunteer. I'll keep poking people, but someone volunteer here. He's a very nice writer. He writes for several pages about a topic, fisheries.
He talks about how overfishing is the result of fisheries being in the commons being the resource with no rent.
That's the economic side of it. Go back a couple pages. He talks about fisheries biologists trying to maximize something. What are they trying to maximize? What are they trying? All you in this row here, all of you here, all 5 of you, you're a group right now. You're all going to be collectively answering this question. What are the fisheries biologists trying to maximize? Look at each other, figure out your answer, tell me what the answer is. Among the 5 of you must have read the paper. Go ahead, talk. Do you know what he says? I had this really good rant about doing your homework like 6 classes ago or something. Apparently you guys didn't go back and watch that 20 times in a row. I should put that on the video screen, right? Did you read it? Did you read it? Did you? Did you? Oh, God. Why are you in this class? Are you here for me to read to you? Tell me. I'm asking you. Do you want me to read to you? No. Okay, what do you want to do in this class? Do you want to be here? If you can leave if you want. And the people next to you, and the people in front of you. Why should I prepare anything? Why should I even bother to teach you? Tell me. Has the topic ever occurred to you? I know that half of you aren't even here, so that's kind of handy. That's a good signal. But if you show up, maybe you should read before you show up. Even pretend to read. It'll be on the midterm. Any questions about the midterm? I'm going to stop talking about the paper. You'll have all kinds of incentives to read it now. Any questions on material that we have covered to date in this class? Things that you might want to know more about before I ask you about things I've covered in this class. Yes?
What is the format of the midterm?
There will be writing. There will be very little math. Besides that, I don't know. It'll probably be 10 to 20 questions. Could be more. Everything else is clear then? Laser clear. You understand the readings that you haven't done. That's good. I can't get more sarcastic. I'm running out of sarcasm.
Are you going to be asking questions about the guest speakers?
Yes. Luckily, we will have apparently another guest speaker later who did his PhD work on oil and gas pipelines and cost-benefit analysis. Then we'll see how great your questions are because you've got a lot of experience on this one. That'll be useful. So no more questions? No, there's a question, yeah? Yes? Am I going to ask you questions based on the homework assignments? Yes. Yeah. That sounds like a consensus. All right, I'll see you guys on Tuesday.